Hailing from the backwoods of New Jersey, welcome to the Jersey Guys Music Podcast, where we feature in-depth music discussions and interviews with special guests from the worlds of hard rock, heavy metal, and AOR music. So settle in and crank it up. Now, here are your hosts, the Jersey Guys themselves, Tom and Mark.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Jersey Guys podcast. I'm Mark Ballo here with my co-host Tom Coyne, and joining us today is another Jersey guy. He's a guy who I think our melodic rock and AOR fans out there are going to know him from his band project Departure. This is a band that released 4 albums between 1998 and 2012, but this is the man behind that. This is Mike Walsh. He's a producer, guitar player, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist. Mike, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good evening. It's great to be here. It's a real pleasure.
Appreciate it. So as I said in the intro there, your band Departure, it's something that's held in high regard, I think, with the melodic rock fans, the AOR fans out there, especially the fans in Europe, who we have a lot of listeners from the UK, Sweden, Germany, Spain, places like that. And I know they hold the band Departure in high regard. And that was a band that released 4 albums on the UK label Escape, which this guy right here to my right is friends with the man behind Escape, Khalil Turk, for many years.
Yes, we go back about from around 1990. Me and Mike were talking about this off the record before we started. We used to write for the same magazine, and we stayed in close contact, and I still talk to Khalil regularly to this day, and we've also always bounce ideas off of different projects, singers, guitar players, and it's a pleasure to have you, Mike. All 4 of these Departure albums I would rate as real upper class AOR melodic hard rock, and I'd like for you to just bring us on from the ground floor of the first album and how that came about.
Sure thing. And, thank you for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with both of you gentlemen this evening. Departure actually, if I may preface it just for a moment, actually started with Mark and I were talking before the show about Dean Fasano's Message record. And I had heard about the record, and it was in disarray. It needed someone to come in and kind of clean it up and get it out. The label was falling behind, and a mutual friend of ours introduced us, and I went down. I was actually working at Soundspa at Stevie D's place up in Edison. Terrific studio, by the way.
Yeah,
and
Stevie
great guy. So I went in there with Steven and Dino and I, and I started to clean it up. I did all the bass lines, I did all the keyboard parts, I did all the guitar parts, I did everything on the record. We finished it in about a month or so, maybe 6 weeks, and I really fell in love with the music at the time. And even though Dino and I had some real differences on our approach to producing the record, I mean, we actually came to a point where we almost went at it. But, we wound up being the best of brothers and the best of friends. And I miss him dearly to this day. Unfortunately, he's not with us any longer. But it actually started with that Message record, the Fine Line album.
Fine Line,
and
yeah.
Of course, Mark. And when that record was finished, Khalil actually came to me and said, "Listen, man, you got anything? I'll give you your own deal, man. You want a deal?" I said, "Sure, I'll take it." And I happened to have my studio, which I opened back in the late 1980s, right down the street from Stevie's room. So I still had a studio and that I was working out of, and started digging through the tapes. And I had basically almost enough for the whole record. And I sent them the stuff, which was what is now Departure 1. And he said, "Yeah, this will work. This will work great." And we had to put it together, and I was missing a couple of tracks, and I needed to kind of go through a little bit of a like a metamorphosis to get him the tracks that he needed. But eventually we got it all together, and that wound up, subsequently coming out of the Message album that we put out, Departure 1. I actually had And not only were on Escape, but we were also Dino was on JVC in Japan, and I wound up on the Marquee label in Japan, and we both did really. I actually had both of those albums out at the same time.
Yeah.
Which was a real treat for me because I hadn't really done that before, and that's how Departure actually, the birth of Departure actually came from the Message record, and that's how it all, that's how we got started.
Oh, okay.
That's how the first record came about.
Now, were those Departure songs, stuff that you had previously? Because even though 1998 they came out, they do have a feel. And I wanted to ask you about the singer Kenny Michaels. Where did he come from?
Well, Kenny, we were actually from the Jersey club circuit. We're actually playing at a big club, which back then was called Modern Times, which turned into the Starland Ballroom and a couple other names through the years. But we were on a ticket together, doing a show there, and he was in a band called Metropolis, and I was in the Mike Walsh band. I had my own group. I just had a record, my first record I ever put out, which came out in 1985. We'll talk about that in a little bit if you like. But
Sure.
So I met Kenny, and we hit it off. I said, "Man, this guy can really sing." So I called the sound man at the Starland Ballroom, which was Modern Times at the time, and I asked him. I said, "Listen, I want that guy's phone number," and he gave it to me. And he gave me Kenny's number, and I'll never forget it. I called him on the phone, and I rang him up. And the first time I ever met him, he took the train to Metuchen, and we met him on the platform. And he came to the little studio we had, and we started doing these demos. And I just fell in love with that voice, and we had a real chemistry as far as our songwriting and my interpretation of he didn't play instruments, so what he would sing to me, and I would chart out what he was doing. I would write some chord changes and get some arrangements together, and we just started doing it, and we just kept doing it. And I had a stockpile of these songs, and that's how the Departure record came about, was from the stuff that I've been doing with him, and just had this big stack of little 1/4-inch tapes in the basement of my studio.
So those would have been songs from, like you said, probably the mid 80s into the latter 80s.
I'd say, yeah, the late 1980s into the early 90s. Sure. Like right around that time.
Okay.
Was he in a band called Razor Sharp also? That was also
I believe he was. I do believe so. Yes.
Yeah.
Another
okay.
Jersey band. That's right. You're right. Good one.
Yeah. He was working with a guy, I think it was Broccoli Rob Studios up there in North Jersey. I can't remember the guy's name, but he had a
I
bunch
remember
of
that
tapes.
Because the band kind of went under two names. It was called Crash Street, and then it changed over to Razor Sharp.
Yes.
And I believe he cut half of the songs that were on the Razor Sharp album.
Yeah, I don't recall that personally. I do remember that when I met him, he was in a band called Metropolis, and
Okay.
those guys they're real good. I mean, he just had that force about him. Just an incredible natural, God-given gift to sing.
Tell me if I'm crazy on this one, and if I'm right here, like tell me if this means anything. But I was listening to the debut Departure album recently, just to kind of familiarize myself with it again. And I'm listening to his vocals, and I hear like Michael Sadler from the band Saga, the Canadian band.
Oh, sure, right,
In
great
that
band.
sound. Is that anything that even makes sense? Would you say that's accurate?
Well, I do. I even think that, like, Tonight We're on the Loose, and that great little lick in that track from Saga, and I love that kind of music, and so did Kenny. But I even believe that Kenny's voice was just almost stratospheric, almost Steve Perry-ish kind of thing. But I do believe that he and I both were influenced by those type of groups back then.
Okay.
Progressive rock.
Was Kansas a big influence of yours?
Yes, indeed.
Because there was a song on there called "Is This Love" that I think is the best song on the album, which it reminds me of like real John Elephant period Kansas.
Yeah, it is it's very Kansas. I had a big influence from Kansas. I was a young kid. I went to see him at the Garden a couple times, and always actually wound up doing a little bit of work with Steve Walsh when he was with Escape a couple of years ago. I don't know if any of the tracks got on the record, but Leo was sending me some things of his, and I was, thrilled to be even just doing it with him. But I did use Kansas, Foreigner, Journey, Boston, those really prog rock type of groups that came out of the 1970s. as kind of a paradigm or a template, if you will,
Okay.
of the kind of where I based my particular songwriting. And when Kenny and I got together and started going through these songs, we both kind of had the same idea of what we wanted. Even though I didn't know him that well, we had a certain chemistry that really worked most of the time. And but yeah, Kansas. I love the guitar arrangements. I love the keyboard arrangements, and I'm a guitarist and a keyboardist and a bass player, and I'm a very accomplished musician in my own right.
The keyboards on that album were great. Absolutely great. Yeah, on the first album, the keyboards.
You mean my record?
Yeah,
The Departure.
Oh,
Departure
sure.
record, yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's a lot of my own programming, a lot of my own keyboard playing. And I didn't really have a keyboard player back then. It was basically just me and Kenny, my engineer, a dear friend of mine who I started that small business with back in like 1987. And we would just go down there and just knock the tracks off one at a time and kind of, it was like an evolutionary process where you kind of feel each other out and the songs start to develop. And then you realize, where you, not only where you want to go with the songs, but my philosophy is always this, that I don't tell the song what it needs. The song tells me what it needs. I listen to what the song has to say to me. It's a very intimate kind of a process when I'm writing, because I with Khalil, as you know, and the Escape label, it's a genre oriented label. So they're looking for that big sound all the time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
You have to come up with that every time you do a record.
Right.
So you're always under that, that once again, that template of that kind of writing, which worked out great originally because that's what I was doing anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
So, between me
Became
and
natural
Kenny
to you. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a natural progress, and it's something that it was a labor of love at the time, for me to do that.
Talk about, you mentioned keyboards a minute ago, and you said you play keyboard yourself, but on that first album, you also had some help from David Rosenthal?
I certainly did, yes. David's studio was also right down the street. It was like Stevie D, me, Dave, we all had studios like within a 3-mile radius, so, and I've been friends with David. I played with David in high school, and we always worked together very well. And I have this kind of musical telepathy with David that I don't have with very many musicians, where, we'll be in the studio and, we'll just look at each other and kind of, give a stink eye or give a crook eye. And then we just know exactly what each other, we're playing off each other without even speaking. And that's a wonderful musical adventure to be involved with when you have someone like that in your life. And it's only happened to me a couple of times, and David is certainly one of them. And I asked him to come in and I asked him to play on some tracks, and he did. He did a wonderful job. And I just, we take the tapes down it was tape back then in those days.
Yeah.
And we went to his place and we fired up the tapes, and he would do his thing, and then I'd bring him back to my place. And it was fun back then when it was tape. Because you actually got to interact with people when it's tape, because you have to go to the studio. You have to bring the tape. And now it's just, send me
email
to
files to whoever.
And it really is kind of boring in a way, because you don't get that human interaction that we used to have when we had to go to someone's room to work. So
Yeah.
But I did tap. In fact, David's been on basically every record I've ever done in the last 20 odd years. David is.
Wow.
I've always called him to work with me because he's just the best there is.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
second of all, like I said, I love that musical camaraderie that we have, and we always have a blast doing it. And it always sounds great in the end, no matter what.
Yeah. Wow.
So when you were working with Kenny Michaels, were you guys on the same page? Did he want to sing on something that was Kansas Journey-esque, or was he there just to help you out with vocals?
No, he really wasn't. It was actually more of a musical partnership. He would come to me and he would just start singing out of the blue. This beautiful melody is, and I would, I'd write it down, and then I would do transcription, and I would put chords to it and stuff. And so it wasn't like, oh, what are we going to do? How are we going to go about? And I already had some songs that I had in the bag that I wanted him to look at. And he already had songs in his head that he wanted me to look at. So we already kind of came to the table with this like preordained stack of tunes that we wanted to go through. And then after we got those done, then we would just come, he actually came and stayed with me for a while. And that was a wonderful time, because we actually got to interact a lot with each other, not only musically, but personally too. We got to know each other a little bit. And that helped us in our progression of our songwriting and where we wanted to go. We didn't really have a idea of what we actually wanted. It just kind of came out of both of us. I was writing a lot, he was writing a lot, and we would just have this interaction that actually turned out to be a real wonderful adventure musically.
Nice.
Now that album, I'm guessing. I mean, Khalil. I know got it signed to a Japanese label. It did fairly well, and he wanted you to do a second album. How come Kenny didn't follow up and you changed singers?
That's when you start doing this and you actually wind up on a label and you have some success with the record and you're doing what you love to do. Let's just say we had contractual differences as far as with the contract and what he really wanted and what I wanted. I think at that point we lost that interpersonal relationship that we had, and the contract got in the way, and then you're talking about money, you're talking about things that get ugly in the music business. It happens to many bands, as you know.
Yeah.
And it happened to me. And so they wanted that record, right away because you got to put it on the record. And they're kind of rushing me. I was actually a real disappointment for me, that second album, because I would have liked to have taken a little bit more time with it. But and that's where Dave Baldwin came in. There were some names kicking around. We needed that album really bad. And I started doing the album without a singer. I just started tracking. We're still at Stevie's. I went back in there and I started tracking the whole record. I actually had the whole album almost done. And then we went through a couple of guys, and then David, his name came out. I don't know, it was Khalil might have said that David had sent him some tapes, and he said, "Why don't you try this guy out?"
I was going to ask you about him. Yeah, because it's funny. I mean, as much as you said you maybe don't have a lot of good memories with that album, because it did come out in short order. It was only a year after the debut was put out in '98, right. And then Open Your Mind, the second one, comes along in 1999. But I don't know, Tom. We've talked about this. I would say that's probably my favorite Departure album.
That's funny because it's probably my least favorite, but I love, what it is? I love the songs. Dean Fasano was going to actually do that record, but we were working on another Message album, and it was almost like a conflict of interest for him to do it. But when I actually co-wrote a couple, 2 or 3 of the tracks on Departure too, we wrote together because we were thinking about doing something, but at the time we really couldn't. The timing wasn't right. And then some names kicked around, and David's name came up. And I knew David from the New Jersey club circuit.
Yeah, he was a big circuit guy. Voices, Tradia.
Voices. I was with the Swingin' Johnsons. I was out there on the road with the Johnsons for a long time, doing the comedy TV show and doing a bunch of things. And it was a crazy time for all of us. It was really wild out there. But I used to run into Dave all the time at Jenkinson's or, down in Nardi's and down in LBI. And we were all nuts. I think they were with Steve Tarkanish. They were signed. We were with Brothers Management. So we interacted out there, and we'd run into each other every time.
On the circuit. Yeah.
Name popped up. I said, I know Dave. And I came. He lives in Jersey. So how much better could that be? So we got together, and I gave him the tapes. He dug the stuff, and we worked out a deal with Khalil, and he came in and knocked it out.
Okay.
No, it's a hell of a record. I mean, my Corporate Wheel is my favorite of the 4, but I think it's a terrific record. It has that song 100 Nights on it that is killer.
Yeah.
100 Midnights.
That's
actually that's one of the songs I co-wrote with Dean. Dino wrote the lyrics for that track, and I did all the music for it. And I came up with that lick da 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 in the beginning with the guitar and the
great track.
Really a beautiful melodic. It's one of my favorites actually too. When I think back to the relationship and the songwriting relationship I had with Dean Fasano, that's one of my all-time favorites.
And I like the song "Hard to Say No." That's on there also.
That's a great song.
That song. For some reason, see if you could, if I'm wrong, it has a little bit of flavor of like something Ty Ketto would have done.
Yeah, that was actually, I came up with that lick, that acoustic lick in the beginning. And Dino, I used to go to Dino's house, and we'd go in his basement and, we'd just kick ideas around, and he'd start writing lyrics down on a piece of paper. We'd go to my studio in Metuchen late at night after we worked, at Stevie's, and we'd go back there and we'd write music for hours, and we just came up with these licks and lines, and that's that personality, like, yeah, when I started, here I am now by myself in here, because I do everything myself. It gets lonely, I miss that interaction with my friends.
Sure.
And many of them are regretfully and unfortunately are not here anymore with us. It happens to be one of them. And he was actually going to do Departure 4 with me, and then he passed away. And I was so devastated. I couldn't even grasp the fact that I wasn't going to do this with him anymore. And it was actually Khalil came up with Andy Kay. He's a Swedish guy. The kid was a young kid. He could sing. So the thing is, it's like Van Halen. David left. You got to get Sammy. You got to keep going, no matter what happens. You keep that momentum moving, because if you don't, it's my band. If I don't keep it moving, who else is going to do it?
Right. Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough to work with some very, very talented people in Departure and many other ventures as well. But those songs I look back on them now with and I have a special place in my heart.
Oh yeah, I've always, for whatever reason, that's my go-to Departure album, and it's just interesting that you said that and how you talked. You felt it was rushed and stuff like that.
Yeah, originally I did. I said, Khalil was calling me every day. Where are the tracks?
Oh, I can only imagine.
Yeah, and he's 5 hours ahead, so
right.
He's in Manchester, right outside of Liverpool, and he would call on the phone and. These off weird hours, because it's so strange. I got the phone's ringing at 3 o'clock in the morning. Who the hell is this? It's play me, and he would make me hold the phone up, and I'd have to play the tracks for him over the phone because there was no internet at the time to email these tracks. I look back on it now, I have to laugh because he would just call at these strangest times. And I knew it was him, and I knew I had to answer it. It's like, I'm going to blow him off. I'll call him tomorrow. You couldn't do that because you call him tomorrow when he's asleep. And then
right.
It was a very interesting interaction with him there in the beginning. But I do miss it to this day, and I look back on that with great fondness. Doing those records and having him involved. He was a real mentor and a good friend. He still is a good friend to this day.
Well, he's a guy that, a lot like myself, that's why we became such good friends. He really has a deep-rooted appreciation for melodic rock music. And we're kind of like the type of guys that pick apart everything and want to know everything, want to know every band, want to know every guy that played on every album. And he was a perfect guy to get a label off the ground because he really had the knowledge of what he wanted. And this was a perfect project for him because all 4 of the albums were right in that wheelhouse of Styx, Foreigner, Journey, right. Kansas, So now there's about a 4-year gap between that and the next album.
Yeah. Corporate Wheel.
Corporate Wheel
was your favorite. Right. Yeah.
Was that
2003?
Well, I think the big gap came between Corporate Wheel and the last one.
Well, that's an even bigger gap. Yeah.
But I did take some gaps. I did want to, I didn't have the singers I wanted to work with. I was trying to get, after doing those melodic records the way I did, I wanted to do other things. Khalil, just to preface what we were talking about before, I said to him, listen, man, we're spending a ton of money in these studios doing these records. Give me, let's pool our resources. You kick in, a few grand, 20 grand, whatever. I'll kick in some money and we'll build a room together. I said, and play all the instruments. All we need is a singer and a drummer. And we talked to Barry Kirtley, who's the financial guy in the label, and Barry, they went for it. And that's how I built the room. And then once I got the room off the ground, I started putting feelers out there. I wanted to try different styles of music. And I think it was good to get away from it for a little bit because it wasn't like it was all the guys sitting together. And when you sign to a Japanese label, they want to know that all these guys are living in a house. I don't know if I can say this off the right. They want to know you're all living in a house together and rocking and rolling. And, it really wasn't like that. But, I had to come up with photos. I had to come up with stories for Japanese radio and Masahito and Burn Magazine and all that stuff. That was obligatory for me to do that. Mm-hmm. And I did that. And I think taking those little breaks, it was good for me personally, because when I got back into it, Timmy Lewis, I didn't have a singer after Dave. Khalil actually once again stepped up to the plate and said, listen to this kid from Florida. He's really good. And I heard Timmy Lewis and I said, okay, we're doing another record. and he was invited to fly up here every week or every couple of weeks to do the vocals. And we got to be real good friends. And I just that Corporate Wheel album is, I think, probably my favorite because it just.
Me too. It's my favorite album also.
There's some great songs on there, and I think Timmy Lewis epitomizes that AOR melodic rock vocal, that I was longing for from the first album. And when Timmy stepped in, I really thought I had found something real special, and I did. It was a really great record, and it was fun working with him and Mike Barris, the engineer, who was here with me. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us either. And we, the three of us just clicked, and we would work into the night, and and we'd take him back to the airport, and it was just crazy, But the excitement about the record was just, you could feel it in the room, when we got the headphones on, he's cutting a vocal, and you almost kind of get chills when you hear certain tracks, and that Sacrifice, that beautiful melodic is just floating over the top of the tracks.
I actually had that song. I have it written down. I wanted to talk to you about that song. Tremendous song.
It's funny, my wife actually came up with that title and came up with the idea of making the Sacrifice. And as soon as I heard that title, I said, that's it, we're doing it. And I had just gotten a friend of mine gave me a Juno 106 synthesizer, and I just got it, and I put it up on the board, and I turned it up, and I came up with that weird wow, and that cool sound just came on, and I just said, this is it, this is the song. And it just evolved from that, from my wife and the conceptual idea of the name of a song called Sacrifice, and what we're all going through, and what we go through for when you are an artist. It's almost like a bohemian type of vibe that you get doing this, because we're not rich from it, we're not, but we're doing what we love to do. And then I just came up with that lick, and then Timmy flew up, and I said, listen to this, and he listened to it, and he started writing out the lyrics, and we started kicking it around, and that's how the great songs come about. That's how that's the process. There's no formula. It you just let it happen. And I mean, when you try to make a formula, nothing happens.
Right. Yeah.
When you close your eyes and just let the music tell you what to do, and that's when the great songs, I think, come about.
Let the music do the talking.
There you go.
Now I have the same philosophy today, and I tell everybody that comes through here the same thing. Just listen to the song; it'll tell you what to do.
How did Khalil find him?
I beg your pardon?
How did Khalil find Timmy Lewis?
I think Timmy sent him a demo.
Oh, he sent him a demo. Okay.
And I think what happens a lot of times when people send Khalil a demo, he's looking for two things. He's looking for a great singer, and he's looking for great songs. And I think a lot of the demos he gets, he hears great people, but he doesn't hear the material the way he wants to hear it. Or it's the other way around. The material is really great, but the singer is not really what he's looking for. He's very passionate. You said before you mentioned he's knowledgeable, but he's also very passionate about what he does.
Oh yeah.
And he can hear talent, and that's one of the things I really love and respect about him, is he can hear talent. And I think that's the formula. Sometimes he'll get a great singer, but stuff wasn't really happening. And he said, okay, listen, this guy sent me his tape. His name's Tim Lewis. And so, and he'd give me his number, and I would call him up. And Khalil just, that's how we worked. It was just, that's how it came about. All those records came about just through Khalil's, and I appreciate his faith in me, his constant persistence on pushing me into doing another record, because at the end there, I just, after you're doing melodic records for so long, you get not tired of it, but you're looking for something else musically to happen,
Yeah.
But I think they're all great records, and I really appreciate the fact that he just kept up and always feeding me singers and always encouraging me and always looking for demos, and I'm still doing it with him today. Last year he sent me a bunch of lyric sheets and said, I want songs. I want them now. And one day I would come in, look at a lyric sheet, get an idea, put it down, do all the harmonies, do everything I did myself, the whole demo that I gave him on these songs he was sending me. And I really appreciated him, having that faith in me to be able to come up with something on the spot like that.
Well, not to jump ahead, but does that mean we're looking at maybe another Departure album? or just something else totally different?
I don't know about that. I mean, it was a long time ago, first of all, and I've moved on to other musical adventures, which I hope to talk about in a little while. But I think it ran its course, you know, and I don't really see it. If I had a singer like that, like in the studio with me now, I would consider it.
Right.
But for me to pump out those tracks and not really have a guy there, I've already been down that road. You know, it's a scary road because you don't know how it's going to end up.
Yeah.
You don't know who you're working with. So in that regard, I don't really see that happening in the future. But you know, who knows?
Yeah. Well, let's jump ahead. Like you mentioned, it was a little bit of a break between the second and third album, but it was a very long break between the third album and the fourth album, which came along in 2012. And again, you mentioned another singer in tow. How did that kind of come about 9 years later?
That was a long break. Well, I was going through some things in my own personal life. You know, I was struggling with, addiction and trying to get myself together. And which, and I've seen so many of my beautiful comrades just not here anymore. And I just didn't want to. God left me here for a reason, and and I know what that reason is. And I just had to find myself. And my dad needed help with his work. And I went and I helped my dad out for a couple of years. I worked for my father. He electrical design engineer, and he designed something that was quite incredible, actually. But I was working for my dad. He needed help, and that worked out to be a good little break, because when I came back, and Khalil said, "I want another record," and I said, "Okay, we'll do another one." And then I said, "I don't really have anybody," so I got this kid from Sweden, Andy K. And I heard his demo, and I said, "Oh my goodness, this is okay, I'll do it." As soon as he opened his mouth, I said, "I'll do it." And I'd been writing all along anyway. I already had a bunch of songs. I never stopped songwriting. It never stops, and I always had a bunch of material piled up. So when I got together with Andy, it didn't take that much long, for me to put it together and get it out there. And what a wonderful singer and a wonderful, very humble guy he is, Andy. It was a real pleasure. And I never met the guy. By that point, we had computers, and we were sending files back and forth overseas. And I never met him, which I thought was kind of strange, because here you're doing an album with a guy you never met. That was probably one of the more awkward moments in my my career with Departure and with the label. And it was odd, because I thought the songs are great, but I think if I had been with the guy, I think me and Andy and I had gotten together in the studio, I think we probably could have pushed it a little farther,
Yeah, it probably would have sounded different.
I'm not knocking it, but, I really wish that I had that chance for that, that one-on-one kind of mano-a-mano relationship with the guy.
Sure.
I really respect him to this day, even,
Wow. Yeah.
I think listeners also sometimes sense with today's projects that they don't have that sense of band cohesion in years past, when you knew that those 4 or 5 guys were in a studio and they were interacting, and you kind of had that feeling that what they were doing was, as a band. And we kind of we're programmed now to know that most of these releases, like you just said, you never met the guy, and there's that little bit of coldness involved in today's music that even the fan kind of senses.
I not only the fans, but I think the musicians and the people that are doing the record feel the same thing.
Absolutely. That goes without saying. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right. And that lack of personal interaction is something that, in my opinion, and it's not everybody, but I think it diminishes the process, and it diminishes the potential of what each song could actually be. Like, imagine how much, well, man, if we were together in that studio, that would have been great. Not that it wasn't great, don't get me wrong. But
it could have been a different great, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, without that human just connection, that one-on-one thing in the studio, and I've been doing this for many, many years, and I know the difference between them, because I know what it's like to be working with guys in here, and I know what it's like to be sitting here by myself all night. and waiting for the vocals to be emailed to me and drop them in. It's just not, doesn't have that same connection, and that's a shame. I mean, that's just technology and the way the world is. There's nothing that, we can do about it. We just have to accept it, and we keep going, and we keep working the way we do,
Right.
and try to put out the best product that we possibly can.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think it's in large part? I mean, at least I think it's in large part because the music today, there are no big AOR melodic rock bands that generate the type of money that could go into a studio or have guys fly in from different places and stay for 2 weeks or 3 weeks like they did, in the 70s or even the 80s. There's just no bands that have that type of power to draw that type of money to do that.
That's funny you mentioned that, because I think a lot of that has to do with the actual record companies. Like, back in the day, a record company would see a band like Foreigner or Van Halen, and they would put money, but they'd get them in the studio. Ted Templeman and all these guys were finding these wonderful bands. And the music business isn't like that anymore. It's they don't go to the Whiskey or Go and
Right.
see a great band and sign them up. Like, I think that's a bygone era of the music industry itself.
It is.
And I think that it has evolved into something, I think, like you said, it just, to find a great band, like, they're just, I think that era of the music that we love it doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, it's sad for me to say. If it does, great. I mean, you hear very few bands coming out, and you see very few bands coming out, that are really, bands. They're just, you have a singer, you have a producer, you hire a couple of guys, the label slaps it together, and you put something out.
Right.
And to me, that's just not real. Like, for me, the music has to be a real thing that you feel in your heart and your soul. And even doing the last Departure record, even doing some of the stuff I'm doing now, I don't feel it anymore, because it's so computerized, it's so mechanical that you kind of lose that heart and that soul about it. And that's one of the things I think I miss more than anything, is that heart and soul. And I think a lot of it has to do, like I said before, that record companies just don't do that kind of thing anymore, where they go out into a bar and see a great band, or we see Kansas, or
Right.
Styx, Foreigner, aforementioned groups that I just talked about. And then it's a shame, but that's just the way it is, and we have to adapt to that. We have to kind of keep it going with the times, because otherwise you just get left behind altogether.
Yeah. Well, bring it. Let's go fast forward. Let's kind of get to the current days. I mean, I know in 2023, you released a solo album, Mike Walsh and Five to Life. Talk a little bit about that. I know there's some other things you probably want to talk about also, which is, we'll get to that too. But talk a little bit about that album that came out. It was Face the Music was the title of it. And
Sure.
it's vastly different than, I think, any of the melodic rock or AOR fans that might know the Departure stuff would hear that. It's a different animal for sure, but it's
Right.
done very well. It was funny because I think the second track I got into it when I was listening to it, and it hit me, and I says, "Oh, this is a little bit of an Allman Brothers feel to it." And I know Tom, this guy sitting here, as you can see, he's the biggest Allman Brothers fan I know, for sure. But he actually pointed out something too, what was the band you mentioned, Archangels, that it reminds you a little bit of? It's got a bluesy.
Yeah, if you remember the
sorta-
band that Charlie Sexton was in called Archangels.
I remember it vaguely.
Yeah.
I remember it vaguely. I know it was kind of like a bluesy kind of.
Yeah, it was
rock.
it was
Little
very
Stevie Ray
it was very earthy.
Earthy.
But with really these sublime, catchy, songs and great vocal. It was a very, very, very different album.
And that's actually he has a good point, because I do hear that in the Face the Music album. So tell us a little bit about that process and how you went and said, hey, okay, it's 2023. I'm beyond the Departure days. How did you come up with this sound? Was this something that you've always been a fan of, with that sort of organic, little bit of bluesy rock sound?
Yeah, sure. Well, that started back in high school. I fell in love with Southern rock music. I loved Leonard Skinner, the Allman Brothers, Elvin Bishop. I don't know if you remember him.
Sure,
Those
absolutely.
guys. I love that sound.
Me too.
And up to that point in my life, I was actually a trombone player for most of my younger days. I started off on a trombone, and
Wow.
I went to school. I did a couple of tours overseas playing a trombone when I was young. And I went to music school, and I got into music school playing the trombone. Just to preface that, and I fell in love with classical guitar music, and I auditioned in my senior year. I stayed all summer, and I studied, and I got into that guitar department, which changed my life forever. And up to that point, I was still playing a lot of music. I was still doing progressive rock, but as a kid, I fell in love with, the Allman Brothers and Leonard Skinner, especially, and Molly Hatchet. Like, that stuff was just, those guys could really kick it,
Mm.
And I was so impressed by that raw talent, guys that, didn't go to music school and didn't study. And I up to that point, I was self-taught. And even though I could read and write and score, and I don't even know how, and that's just God did that for me. I have no idea how I even know how to do that to this day until I went to college. But I fell in love with that music. And I kind of, over the years, you kind of get away from it, especially later on when I really started doing progressive music, and I had a studio and I started writing music. I really wanted to do stuff that was a little bit more musically intense, with the arrangements and the vocals and the keyboards and the stuff we talked about earlier. But I let it go, and I just knew that I wasn't going to do another Departure record. And I had these songs I'd been writing, and I didn't know what direction they were going. Like I said earlier, I just let the songs kind of tell me where they wanted to go. And, I was still struggling, with my inner demons, if you want, for lack of a better word.
Mm.
And a lot of those songs came out of that experience, of what I went through, and my personal relationships with my family, and my relationship with myself, and how I face the music. Is, what better way to say it? Listen, man, you got to face it. You got to deal with this. You got to head on,
Yeah.
And that's what came in. And I had the immense pleasure of working with Artie Lang from Howard's show, and we just clicked and started writing some songs together, and we had a really wonderful. I spent a few weeks with Artie, and we came up with some great stuff. And when I got back, I just ran in the studio and just started doing demos. I didn't have a deal. I didn't have a label. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I had to record these songs, and I started doing it. And I knew I wanted Stevie D to get involved, because I respect him tremendously as a producer and as a musician. And he helped me out. He did, I do my drum tracking there and stuff. And he introduced me to the singer who wound up being on a Five to Life record, Doug Henthorn, who was a tremendous talent. Also another guy I did a record with who I never met. Mm. And, here we go again, but the guy was so in tune with what I wanted, and it sounded so much like me. It was uncanny. Even people said, I can't believe it. He sounds like you.
Wow.
But Steve, turned me on to Doug. And as soon as I heard Doug, I knew that this is the direction that the record was going to go, because, we weren't going to do the high Journey, Foreigner stuff. I wanted something more natural sounding, more earthy, more, a brown sound to it, like, the earth, like dirt almost. And that's what I got. And I'm very proud of the record. I think it's one of my finest records I've ever done. And I'm doing another one now. It's even taken a more of a different direction. I try to, each record I do, I'm trying to figure out something that's going to be different than the last record. Mm. And that's one thing about working with Escape and doing the records in Japan, is you're kind of stuck in that paradigm, like I mentioned earlier.
Right.
And I really wanted to break that and just kind of do whatever whatever God told me to do. God just works through me. I'm just a vessel. I'm just something that funnels out. I really believe that, God has blessed me with a tremendous gift, or cursed me. I can't decide which one's more appropriate from time to time. But I will do that. And I love the Five to Life record. I love the songwriting. I love that natural sound. I use Steve Paz on drums. He's out there on the road with the B Street Band, and he plays all over the world and having a great time. I actually did the Mark Thompson Smith record, years before that. I knew Stevie from way back in the day in the 90s.
Oh, okay.
We just hooked up somehow, and I said, listen, I'm doing a record. You want to come in and do it? And he just came in and knocked the whole thing out in one day.
Mm.
It was really exciting. But that's how that came about. It's my own personal experiences and what I had been going through and the struggles that I was trying to overcome. And that's how the record came about. And I was really pleased with that kind of off the beaten path kind of sound that I got. I didn't plan it. I wanted to be, it just happened, And then I said, the great records just happen.
Yeah.
I think when you sit down and try to do a record and really try to tell it where to go, it doesn't go anywhere. You just got to kind of close your eyes and kind of let the music unfold in front of you. And that's just my experience.
Yeah. Now this new material you're working on, that will be more, it's going to be Five to Life material again, another album?
Yes. Okay.
It's going to be the first one is available you sell it on Bandcamp?
Yeah, well, I actually got a deal. I got a deal with Rock Company Records overseas. Peter Cox, wonderful guy, and who kind of let me go. I sent them the tapes. A friend of mine turned me on to the label, and I sent him the stuff, and he really dug it. He said, "Okay, let's put something together." And I sent him some material, and it kind of gave me that musical freedom that I was looking for, where I could just be myself and not have to worry about sticking to a specific genre of music.
Yeah,
I think that helped a lot. I think that has a lot to do with it. And that's how I started off. And then, Peter liked the stuff. He gave me a deal and I put it out, and I sent him some new material. It took me a couple months to figure out where to go, but I have found another different direction to go in. And I think it's a really exciting sound, and I'm working on it now. And I hope that I'll be able to put it out, by the end of the year, I'm hoping.
Okay.
So you managed to escape out of the AOR vortex.
You escaped the escape.
Because I've had this conversation with so many musicians. We just had the guys on from Alien and the Swedish band, and it's so hard to escape that pigeonhole of producing AOR music by the numbers, because it's the one genre of music where people will not accept anything other than the parameters of what they want in AOR, which is something that sounds like Journey, Foreigner, Boston,
right.
Stick. Right. And when you step out of that a little bit, it's thumbs down, this album sucks, fuck you, we're not listening to you no more.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you got to that point, but you
got to look at some. You got to look at some of the reviews when guys do step out of the box. It's that bad. I mean, it really is. When you get an AOR band that steps out of the box a little bit, it does not go over good. I don't.
But it's funny because guys like Tom and I, we're more open minded. We're huge music fans, guys that have thousands and thousands of CDs and albums and stuff like that. Right. But we can accept stuff when it's a little bit off left of center.
Well done, yeah.
But some of the fans out there, like you said, there's those hardcore AOR guys or melodic rock guys,
especially the European guys.
Yeah, that they just want to hear that, and they don't want to hear anything slightly different. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the Japanese audience is quite the same. Also, they just, what are you doing, man?
Without a doubt.
And that's why you said before, do you ever think about doing another Departure record? It may not be another Departure record, but I certainly would be interested in doing another AOR, like melodic rock record. That's not out of the question at all. If I could find the right guy, maybe it would be something that isn't Departure. Maybe I could try something else,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not what I'm doing right now, but I wouldn't put that off the table. No, I would say that there's always a chance that I could do something like that, because I love writing that style of music. I love producing it. I love playing it. It's very challenging. It's just, there's nothing like it. That style of music has been with me since I was a teenager, since I was a kid. So you never really escape it. Yeah.
Pardon
the words.
Pardon the pun.
Right. But sorry, Khalil. I do believe that there's always a chance that something like that could come about if the cards were it was a perfect storm scenario where I could knock a record like that out. I would certainly love to do it. I'm always writing music, and that's another thing. When you look at music from a stylistic point of view, you can take one song and arrange it 10 different ways.
Right.
You can make it AOR, you can make it country, you can make it rap. You could do anything to one song. You could tear it apart and do anything you want with it. So that's always a possibility because I'm always writing songs. It wouldn't be that difficult for me to take something, even off of the Five to Life album, turn it into a melodic AOR track. It's not that difficult to do, especially when you have your own room and you can do whatever you want whenever you want.
Yeah.
It all depends on, like I said, if I could find a singer or somebody like that I could get on with, and it's got to be that chemistry, that
right.
I'd like to do it with somebody maybe from Jersey who I could, come to the studio and,
right.
Doing their tracks, and emailing them back and forth, like I said. And I'll always say this, that, there's something that gets lost in there. But
sure.
I do say Doug Henthorn did a tremendous job on the Five to Life record. It's one of my all-time faves.
Nice.
And one other thing I wanted to mention is my buddy, Eddie Hawley, Hawley Jersey Guitars. I'm wearing his shirt here. And Eddie is a dear friend and a tremendous luthier. And when I did the Five to Life album, I was looking for something to change my sound. And Eddie is building these guitars, Telly, Strats, Les Pauls, and building these guitars. And I got a hold of a couple of these things. He came down, and I just fell in love with these things. So now I have 3 of them. They're behind me. And it's the guy who winds his own pickups, and right to the specs of a '59 Les Paul, pickup that he just wound for me last night. I was with him for 10 hours, and the guy is just a tremendous talent. And I think he had a lot to do with that change in my tone. You talk about Allman Brothers, you talk about that bluesy tone. A lot of that comes from the instruments that I wound up using on the record.
Sure.
There's different other instruments that I had before with the big, Seymour Duncan, killer rock stuff that I used with the Departure records. The instruments that I wound up using had a lot to do with that sound. And I just wanted to put that out there. That Eddie's a terrific guy, and he makes wonderful instruments, and he's a dear friend. And I'm going to be using these guitars now for quite some time, and I'm using them now on the new record. And I just love the tone that I get from these guitars. It's just something new and different and fresh, and it really inspires my playing a great deal when you get an instrument like that. It's been a long time since I had a new guitar that I fell in love with, and I fell in love with these instruments, and it's really made a big difference in my style, stylistically, musically. The way I interpret, the way I play, the solos I take, and I start to just get on these instruments, and it gives me that freshness that I was looking for in a record, and that had a lot to do with it. The instruments that I'm using now.
Does he have a website where people can?
Hawley Jersey Guitars. Check him out.
We'll have to plug it on the closing credits. We'll give it a little plug there. We'll mention it.
Yeah, Eddie's a terrific guy and a dear friend, and man, this guy can build guitars. I'll never go back to Fender and Gibson again. No offense.
Yeah.
But these things are just beautiful instruments that they suit me just for what I'm looking for, what I was looking for, and what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
They're just a tremendous asset to me in the studio today.
Nice. Well, one thing we got to ask you about, because when we first kind of hooked up to talk about doing an episode with you, you had mentioned that you might have some good Richie Blackmore stories. We know you have the relationship with David Rosenthal from years ago. I don't know if it stems from that, but what can you tell us about that? Because we're always up for a good Richie Blackmore story or two.
My Richie Blackmore experience just came out as a fluke. The engineer I mentioned before, Mike Barris, who's not with us any longer, but Mikey was engineering my Departure record here with me, and he said, "Listen, I just got a gig. I'm going on the road with Richie Blackmore, and it's Blackmore's night." I said, "Cool, I'll keep working. You let me know when you get back." And a little time went by. He called me up and he said, "Listen, we're going to be out in Long Island. Why don't you come out? Meet Richie." And I kind of told him about you. I said, "Okay." I think it was up in Boston at the time. I can't remember, but I said, "I'll meet you in Long Island." I drove out there to see Richie. I met him, and we had a little talk, had a couple of beers, and I didn't really talk to him all that much, but we hit it off a little bit. We talked about he loved classical music, and I studied classical music, and we talked a little bit about that, and I think he liked that, and I'm like, okay. And I went home. I didn't think another thing about it. I guess a couple of weeks later, Mikey called me and said, "Richie wants you to come. He's inviting you to his Christmas party out in Long Island, his house." Great. So I drive out there again, 2.5 hours. It took me longer to get there from Jersey than it did from Boston. It's a long. It's out there, man. But I went out there to see Richie, and he has a pub in his basement, a literal pub.
Wow.
And we're hanging out. Everybody's having beers and having a good time. And he said, "Well, Richie wants to talk to you now." Okay. So where is he? He's back here. So there's a hallway with the bathroom, just like a pub, and there's this room off to the side. It's soundproof. It's big, thick glass doors, and there's a grand piano in there, and Richie's sitting at the back. I'm like, okay. I walked in. He said, "Oh, mate, I don't know." I said, "All right." He said, "You play?" I said, "Yeah." I sat. He said, "You know any Bach or you know any Mozart?" I said, "I do, but I really don't think this is the time to do it." A few beers and kind of looked at me, and Mikey's like, "What are you doing? Come on." I didn't know what to do. I felt like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in Ghostbusters. The first thing that came to my head, I started to play Stone Cold off of the Straight Between the Eyes album, because, it's a great album, and I knew Dave was on it.
Yeah.
I started doing the intro, and I kind of did this lounge lizard version of Stone Cold off of that record. And he's like, "Oh, all right, man, all right." And he left. And Mikey just hits me. He goes, "What are you doing? You crazy?" I said, "I couldn't think of anything else. It's 1 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
I'm like, "Well, so much for that." I'm like, "I'll never hear from him." And I got a call a couple of days later from Candace, Richie's wife, Candy. Her mother was Richie's manager at the time. She called me and she said, "Richie wants a demo." And I said, "Of what?" "What kind of a demo do you want?" I said, "We're mailing you the Blackmore's Night material. Come up with something." So they sent me the record. I transcribed the whole record, all his parts, and there was a Bach piece on there, the Bach Minuet in G major. Da, 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 and Candace is playing the recorder, and just picture him in tights and jester hats and tambourines. So that's what I did. I had the Bach Minuet, the piano version of it, in my studio. So I went and got it, and I did a classical arrangement of it on the guitar. So I played that. I recorded it. I put a synthesized recorder on it, and I put some tambourine on there. And I think I did one other thing. I did Mozart's the Sonata in C. And that one, I took the Marshall and I just read the right hand on one track, and then I overdubbed the left hand on another track. So I said, "He's either going to love this or I'm never going to hear from him again."
Yeah.
And he did. They called me back and they invited me out to play with him. And I went out there a couple of times to work with Richie. When I got there, I had the little manuscript book of all the Blackmore's Night material. He said, "All right." So he had a restaurant we went into. They closed the restaurant for him. It was just me, Candy, her mom, and Richie. Richie and I. And he wanted to do that Bach piece first, and we did the Bach, and it sounded great. And one thing I'll say about Richie, I think that most people don't know, is that he is a wonderful acoustic guitarist. I think people don't, all they hear is Rainbow, Black, Deep Purple, but he has such a heart and soul about him. I had chills just when, I'm playing the actual piano line, and he's kind of playing around me, and Kenny's playing the recorder, and somebody had a tambourine on the floor. They were hitting it with their foot. It was pretty wild.
Wow.
And we said, "Let's look at the Blackmore's Night," right? And I open up the book and we start the Blackmore's Night stuff. And I'm playing his parts. He's like, whoa, you can't do that. That's my part. I'm like, "I'm sorry, I didn't know what you want me to do, I just want you to kind of play behind me, man, And that was very comical. And I was out there with him a couple of times. And I said, "Listen, I just got a record deal. I just bought a house. I just got a studio. And, I got my own thing going on." And I wanted more of a musical, I think, interaction. I think he just was looking for somebody to kind of back him up.
Yeah.
I think I was really the guy to do that.
Yeah.
That's not really musically what I was looking to do with him.
Right.
He wanted me to go out there and do some shows in Long Island. It's a 2.5-hour drive. You know what I mean? It was tough to do. When my wife wasn't really keen on me going out, and doing, going on the road, or it just was a bad time, I think, for me personally. But I had the one thing I did ask him last time I saw him was, can we please do Smoke on the Water? And he was hemming and hawing. He didn't really want to do it, you know.
Could you blame him? He's only probably played that song 10,000 times.
Yeah, so have I.
Yeah, right. And so is every other guitar player, right? There you go.
I pretty much begged him, and eventually he relented, and we did it. We did a little version of it. Just the music.
Where is he in Huntington? Is that where he lives?
Geez, it was a long time ago. I really don't remember. He was right on the water, though. He had a beautiful house.
That's what I've heard. Yeah,
right on the water. It was gorgeous. I mean, you know.
No, he's been out there for like 45 years.
Yeah, he's been living in that house for a very long time. You could tell just when you go in the house that he's been there forever, and there's records everywhere and all kinds of.
Yeah, I believe he moved out there like in '81, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's right around the time that they did stuff with Dave. You know.
Yes.
It's funny because Richie told me that story. That I checked out the podcast with Dave, obviously, and Richie told me that we were talking about Dave a little bit because you know. Had to, you know, and he told me that story when they took all his furniture out and put it outside, and he came home from the studio and all stuff was all set up outside in the snow.
Yeah,
that was the first time I heard that story when Richie told me. And then I heard it the other night when Dave told it. I just cracked up because I had heard it before. You know, that was pretty funny. But you know, there was a wonderful. I talked about that musical telepathy, you know, that you have with people that I have with Dave. That you really just don't find that in your life. Time, you know, very often, and with Richie, it was just great to interact with him, and I think the story that I have about Richie, you know, is I wasn't auditioning for him, I wasn't, you know, I'm like, okay, I like this, you know, this is cool. I wasn't trying to kiss his ass, you know what I mean? And I think he liked that. He also liked the fact that I, you know, transcribed all of his music for him, and even though he didn't like me playing the parts that he was doing, it actually was. We hit it off, you know. We really had a really musically we hit it off together, and that's something that I'm very fond of, and I'll remember for a very long time to come.
That's cool.
That I had that little bit of time.
Just the fact that you met him and spent time with him and interacted with him, and he wanted you at his house. That's can't get better than that.
Priceless stuff. Yeah.
I didn't think I was ever going to hear from him ever again.
Yeah.
I'm playing Stone Cold on a grand piano at 1 o'clock in the morning, half in the bag, you know. He's sitting back there. It was very auto train, you know.
Yeah.
Because to me, he is the quintessential figure of hard rock and heavy metal. I rate him above everybody, including Iommi, Page, because of just how he just kept flipping the script with Deep Purple and changing the lineups and making it better and better and better, and then left and started Rainbow and all the different, you know, levels of Rainbow. I think the guy really set the template for everything in the 80s. You look at all the bands that made it big in the 80s were all heavily inspired by the Rainbow stuff.
Even the bands in the 70s. I mean, I listened to Richie Blackmore, you know, when I was a kid, when I was 13, 14 years old, and listening to this guy. And one of the great things I always respected about Richie, which I, you know, had come to admire even later in life because I studied classical music myself, is that he had this classical element about him in his playing. He never talked about it really much. He never talked about if he took lessons or studied. I didn't really care, to be honest with you. I love that interaction that he uses this classical music and incorporates it into like a rock genre. He was doing that stuff like before Yngwie, before all these neoclassical guys were coming around. He was doing that. And most people don't realize that until you really take a closer listen to the music. And, you know, having studied classical music, I had such I know why he started Blackmore's Night. I know why he left all of that behind, because he has such a passion for that music. It's almost like classical pop music, for lack of a better term. But that's what he's doing. He's taking these classical pieces and, you know, kind of like, just think of if you were living 200-300 years ago and you started a band like this, which there were, it's like pop classical.
Yeah.
And he's a master at it. I mean, this guy, when you hear him play the acoustic guitar, I never heard him play the acoustic guitar in my life. here I am sitting there playing the acoustic guitar, and I'm like, this guy is. I had chills just listening to him play, and it was something that I'll never forget, and it was also something that I gave me great inspiration in my music. My Departure song. There's a lot of classical elements in my music. If you listen to certain guitar solos, or you listen to certain arrangements, there's all kinds of cool things going on, and a lot of that comes from that influence, and a lot of that comes from that time. Short time I spent with Richie was very inspirational for me, and I didn't take that for granted one bit, not even today.
Yeah,
and I was grateful that I had spend that little bit of time with him.
Yeah, cool stuff.
It was terrific.
Nice. Well, anything else, Tom?
No, I'm good.
You good? Well, Mike, we appreciate the stories tonight. Some good stuff.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, everybody look forward to and check it out. You got the album from 2023, Mike Walsh and Five to Life. But there's something new coming down the pike there, so keep an eye. Is there anywhere that people can follow along? Is it just the Bandcamp page, or?
Yeah, sure. Or you could check the Rock Company label. They're going to do some videos. I'm also working on a quick mention of a record I'm working on now with a great trumpet player and a good friend of mine, Richard Wardlow. Richard Wardlow's Wall of Sound. You can check it out on YouTube. And we started off doing a Maynard Ferguson tribute. And we got the original Don Sebesky charts, and we changed them up. We took all the woodwinds out and made it all brass. We did all the arrangements and changed it into a brass record. And now we're doing our own arrangements of our own songs that we're putting together and doing our own charts. It's called Rich Wardlow's Wall of Sound. And you could check it out on YouTube. It's remarkable music. I mean, you talk about, off the path. This stuff is off the path, but it's more a labor of love.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that you guys would appreciate because it really has this tremendous jazzy feel to it that's just wonderful. And the arrangements we're doing now are all our own. Every time we get in the studio, it just gets better and better and better. And I'm really looking forward to that record coming out, at the end of the year also. So keep your eyes out for that as well.
For sure.
And the Five to Life stuff, hopefully that'll be out at the end of the year, working on it now. And I look forward to, maybe talking with you guys in the future.
Yeah, for sure. So everybody, Mike Walsh, thanks again for all the stuff, all the stories tonight. We appreciate it, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
You got it. It's my pleasure, gentlemen.
All right.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
It's a fragile light that shines. Still every shadow knows your name. It's a kind of light that blinds, but won't shield you from the pain. It's the light